She pulled a screen aside and revealed a cage that contained a pair of mournful-eyed marmosets. Berkowitz and Orsino looked at each other. Berkowitz touched his nose. "I thought I smelled something." "What are you doing with those?" asked Orsino. Berkowitz said, "At a guess, she's been scanning the marmoset brain. Have you, Jenny?" I started considerably lower in the animal scale. She opened the cage and took out one of the marmosets, which looked at her with a miniature, sad old man with sideburns expression. She clucked to it, stroked it, and gently strapped it into a small harness. Orsino said, "What are you doing?" "I can't have it moving around if I'm going to make it part of a circuit, and I can't anesthetize it without vitiating the experiment. There are several electrodes implanted in the marmoset's brain, and I'm going to connect them with my LEG system. The laser I'm using is here. I'm sure you recognize the model, and I won't bother giving you its specifications." "Thanks," said Berkowitz. "But you might tell us what we're going to see." "It would be just as easy to show you. Just watch the screen." She connected the leads to the electrodes with a quiet and sure efficiency, then turned the knob that dimmed the overhead lights in the room. On the screen, there appeared a jagged complex of peaks and valleys in a fine, bright line that was wrinkled into secondary and tertiary peaks and valleys. Slowly, these shifted in a series of minor changes, with occasional flashes of sudden major differences. It was as though the irregular line had a life of its own. "This," said Renshaw, "is essentially the EEG information, but in much greater detail." "Enough detail," asked Orsino, "to tell you what's going on in individual cells?" "In theory, yes. Practically, no. Not yet. But we can separate this overall LEG into component grams. Watch." She punched the computer keyboard, and the line changed, and changed again. Now it was a small, nearly regular wave that shifted forward and backward in what was almost a heartbeat. Now it was jagged and sharp, now intermittent, now nearly featureless, all in quick switches of geometric surrealism. Berkowitz said, "You mean that every bit of the brain is that different from every other?" "No," said Renshaw, "not at all. The brain is very largely a holographic device, but there are minor shifts in emphasis from place to place, and Mike can subtract them as deviations from the norm and use the LEG system to amplify those variations. The amplifications can be varied from 10,000-fold to 10-million-fold. The laser system is that noise-free." "Who's Mike?" asked Orsino. "Mike?" said Renshaw, momentarily puzzled. The skin over her cheekbones reddened slightly. "Did I say? Well, I call it that sometimes. It's short for my computer." She waved her arm about the room. "My computer, Mike, very carefully programmed." Berkowitz nodded and said, "All right, Jenny, what's it all about? If you've got a new brain-scanning device using lasers, fine. It's an interesting application. And you're right, it's not one I would have thought of. But then I'm no neurophysiologist. But why not write it up? It seems to me the front office would support. But it's just the beginning." She turned off the scanning device and placed a piece of fruit in the marmoset's mouth. The creature did not seem alarmed or in discomfort. It chewed slowly. Renshaw unhooked the leads, but allowed it to remain in its harness. Renshaw said, "I can identify the various separate grams. Some are associated with the various senses, some with visceral reactions, some with emotions. We can do a lot with that, but I don't want to stop there. The interesting thing is that one is associated with abstract thought." Orsino's plump face wrinkled into a look of disbelief. "How can you tell?"
That particular form of gram gets more pronounced as one goes up the animal kingdom toward greater complexity of brain. No other gram does. Besides,
she paused. Then, as though gathering strength of purpose, she said,
those grams are enormously amplified. They can be picked up, detected. I can tell, vaguely, that there are thoughts.
By God, said Berkowitz. Telepathy.
Yes,
she said defiantly.
Exactly.
No wonder you haven't wanted to report it. Come on, Jenny.
Why not?
Said Renshaw warmly.
Granted, there could be no telepathy just using the unamplified potential patterns of the human brain, any more than anyone can see features on the Martian surface with the unaided eye. But once instruments are invented, the telescope, this.
Then tell the front office.
No, said Renshaw. They won't believe me. They'll try to stop me. But they'll have to take you seriously, Jim, and you, Adam.
What would you expect me to tell them? Said Berkowitz.
What you experience. I'm going to hook up the marmoset again and have Mike, my computer, pick out the abstract thought gram. It'll only take a moment. The computer always selects the abstract thought gram unless it is directed not to do so.
Why? Because the computer thinks too? Berkowitz laughed.
That's not all that funny, said Renshaw. I suspect there is a resonance there. This computer is complex enough to set up an electromagnetic pattern that may have elements in common with the abstract thought gram. In any case,
the marmoset's brain waves were flickering on the screen again. But it was not a gram the men had seen before. It was a gram that was almost furry in its complexity, and was changing constantly. I don't detect anything, said Orsino.
You have to be put into the receiving circuit, said Renshaw.
You mean implant electrodes in our brain? Asked Berkowitz.
No, on your skull. That would be sufficient. I'd prefer you, Adam, since there would be no insulating hair. Oh, come on. I've been part of the circuit myself. It won't hurt.
Orsino submitted with a bad grace. His muscles were visibly tense, but he allowed the leads to be strapped to his skull.
Do you sense anything?
Asked Renshaw.
Orsino cocked his head and assumed a listening posture. He seemed to grow interested in spite of himself. He said,
I seem to be aware of a humming and a little high-pitched squeaking. And that's funny, a kind of twitching. Berkowitz said, I suppose the marmoset isn't likely to think in words.
Certainly not, said Renshaw.
Well then, said Berkowitz, if you're suggesting that some squeaking and twitching sensation represent thought, you're guessing. You're not being compelling.
Renshaw said, So, we go up the scale once again. She removed the marmoset from its harness and put it back in its cage.
You mean you have a man as a subject? Said Orsino, unbelieving.
I have myself as a subject, a person.
You've got electrodes implanted?
No. In my case, my computer has a stronger potential flicker to work with. My brain has 10 times the mass of the marmoset brain. Mike can pick up my component grams through the skull.
How do you know? Asked Berkowitz.
Don't you think I've tried it on myself before this? Now help me with this, please. Right.